You are exercise. Good job. I'm an old out of shape person, so I've just started. I don't know. Okay. So hopefully everything you turned in, I graded. Somebody turned in something, something new, because in round one it didn't show up for some reason. So I think everything from week one is graded. I know at least one or two of you have turned in week two. Oh, okay. If somebody asked if they uh, could get some feedback, and I put it in the what is that thing? The rubric. The rubric. So hopefully you can read it if you either go into, see, I don't know where you would read it. I know where I would read it. Um, the grade section or the assignment section. So try those things. If you can't see it, I mean, that's cool. Let me know and I'll send you a copy of it. Um, sorry, something in my eye. All right, let's see. All right. Hopefully everything's going well for you guys. If you need some assistance on the weekly questions, let me know. You can't see any comments. I made them. I don't know why you can't see them. I'll see if I can go in. I think there's a way for me to go in and look at student view or see if maybe I can see them. But I'll ask you guys maybe to go in either the assignment section or the grade section to see if, wow, you guys are doing all the stats. The one thing I didn't allow you to see, because I didn't want you to freak out, but I can let you see it if you want, is you know that when you turn this stuff in, it goes through a plagiarism check. Yeah. So I didn't let you see what percentage of yours is plagiarized because some of you would have a fit. And I'm just not up for that. I've got like 100 students. But yeah, I don't want you all emailing me and telling me you didn't really plagiarize, because things like if you quote something, it shows up as copied, because it is. I mean, you quoted, but that's legit. If you copy the question, it shows up as copied. I don't know what you guys are saying in the chat. Let me look. Average 7.3. So, and I don't know why, but it's actually 8. So somebody's grade is probably an 8, but probably the overall average of all the ones I've graded so far is 7.3. I don't know how that could be because I don't give anybody a point anything. Yeah, and I'm not really, math's not my thing. I'll go back and look. Also, I know the first class of the day, there was something wrong with one of the rubrics. So I did go back and fix that. I didn't notice their problem in your rubric. Some of the grades turned out like 0.7 instead of 7 or 0.8 instead of 8, and that was distressing to them. I can't imagine why. So if you, yeah, it could be the stats, just weird. And it may, I don't know what it would include. I'll go back and look, and I guess we've got to figure out how to see the comments, So if any of you have seen the comments and know how you saw them, I'm not going to look at your chat anymore. All right. Let's look at the weekly question. How about that? You guys keep chatting about the stats. All right, weekly questions 1302. That sounds good. Okay. Dang it, you guys are still chatting. All right, so we're in number 2. Are we doing 2 this week? Yeah, because you did the reconstruction one last week. Discuss the experiences of Native Americans in the Gilded Age. Mostly they were bad, but give me more detail than that. Be sure to include the Dawes Act in this discussion. How does the emergence of the ghost dance reflect the experience of the Indians? What was the significance of Wounded Knee? Of course, when you talk about the ghost dance, certainly talk about what happened at Wounded Knee, but talk about why the ghost dance developed and the idea that the buffalo would return and the white guys would leave. And that was really a desire to have their old culture back. It wasn't necessarily hatred of the white guys, although they probably weren't fond, huh? But just the idea that their culture had been taken from them, had been intentionally changed, and they would like to have it back, as you might imagine. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Somebody saw some feedback. Okay. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about it in the chat, not about the feedback, of course, but did you see it when you looked in the assignments page or the grade page? Did you have any? Okay. Found the, okay. All right. Had to go to the grade section. Yeah, I'm not always the best at helping with that because my side looks different than yours. Clicked on the assignment, turn in. Okay. All right, you guys keep talking about that if you like. All right, let's look at the notes. We're in chapter 16, 17. We're probably ahead of our questions, aren't we, a little bit? Oh, but we're going to talk about labor union stuff today. That'll be good. Yeah. And depressing. Yeah, okay. All right. Hey, and guys, don't worry at all about making mistakes or anything. One of the things that you'll notice as you get older as a student, this thing I sort of had to grow into, I suppose. When I was in high school 100 years ago, I said that all weekend and somebody kept making fun of me. In the 1980s, when I was in high school, I was one of those students. A couple of you are because you email me all the time. So I know who you are. We didn't have email back then, by the way. But I was one of those students, like I got an A in everything, graduated with 4.0, thought the world would end if I got a B, thought I was I did not think I was the greatest at everything. I was a nervous student, like, oh my gosh, I may not be as smart as I think. When I go to college, everybody's going to be smarter than me. What if I get a B? Will the world end? I got a B, I told you, first semester, the world did not end. What I got a B in? Oh, is it ridiculous calculus thing? Why in the world did a liberal arts major take calculus? I don't know. It was dumb. I'm just saying. It was a bad decision on my part. Because when do I use calculus? Never. Never. But I thought, that was the next math class in line. That's what I should have taken. I didn't realize that you're not good at math. You just take college algebra or math for liberal arts majors, whatever they call that class. And, I lived through getting a B. And then I also found out that there were certain times when I was in college, um, someone got a B in March 2020. Hopefully you lived through it. I bet a lot of people got a B in March 2020. And honestly, they were probably thrilled with it. But I mean, sometimes you live through things like a pandemic and it alters your ability to concentrate and do your work and that kind of stuff. Or maybe somebody's sick at your house. Maybe it's you. Maybe you broke your hand. Somebody broke their hand in one of the classes. There are things that are going to affect your performance. And your best may not always be an A. Sometimes your best is a B. Sometimes your best is just finishing. So, oh, sorry about the hand. Yeah. But sometimes your best is just getting it done and then getting better later. So just do your best. And, 1 week you might get 7, the next week you get 10. It's okay. Really, it is. Yeah. And you get to miss some points. You don't have to be perfect at an A or B or whatever it is you want to get. All right. Let's talk about labor unions. Yeah, labor unions. When I was watching the news, they were talking about labor unions. You know which ones? The teachers' unions in Chicago. There's a big fight between the mayor of Chicago and the teachers' unions of Chicago because one of them wants all the school to be in person and one of those groups does not. The teachers are not quite ready to go back because they want shots and some other stuff first. And the mayor says, look, we spent like $1 billion on the schools. She probably didn't spend $1 billion, but they might have. I don't know. Chicago's pretty big. Get them all cleaned up. You got to go back. It's hard on the kids. So they're fighting it out. So labor unions are groups of workers that are supposed to form to protect workers' rights. We see them not very much in Texas because it's a right to work state. During the era we're talking about, every state was a right to work state. Right to work state in the modern era, they didn't call it that in the long time ago era, the 1870s. A right to work state is when they can't force you to join a union. You don't have to, let me try again. Union membership is not required for your profession. And in a in a right to work state, there's not collective bargaining where the boss um, gets together with the union and they decide what your wages are going to be and what your contracts are going to be, that sort of thing. Oh, so no, excuse me, for yawn. Exclusive consultation. There aren't any large workers groups that typically cause your wages to go up and give you better worker protection. During this era, I know in the modern era, I hear people, they say like, unions have too much power. And then I tell them it's because you don't live in Texas. My friends who live in the Northeast, like unions are so powerful. And go, it depends on where you are. But in the era we're talking about, you already know the rich guys who own the businesses were very, very powerful. They still are. But the workers had no rights, literally no rights, none. We've talked about this. You could get hurt at work. And what they did, oh my goodness, there's a really pretty little cardinal on my back porch. Sorry. What they did if you got hurt at work is they fired you. Yeah, they fired you. That is not cool. And they didn't they didn't have workers' compensation or anything like that. So if you got hurt at work, you just got fired. And if you never got well, you're just going to be poor. There's no minimum wage. They can treat you pretty much however they want at work as long as people keep working there. Yeah, so it's a tough time to be a worker. People are going to start to try to form unions during this era. And the most prominent union of the era is the Knights of Labor. Yes, the Knights of Labor. And their thought was that everyone involved in the means of production should be a member of the union. So they were cool with the owners being members of the union, but they thought all of the workers should be in there too. And I think their thought's a lovely thought, that everybody involved in production benefits when everybody involved in production is treated well. So what's best for what's best for the assembly line worker is also best for the CEO. What's best for the Amazon driver is also best for Jeff Bezos. Is that the right guy? I think he's the Amazon guy. I think he was on the news. He's quitting. Not really quitting, but you know what I'm saying. He's going to go off and spend money or something. Charitable money. So the Knights of Labor is pretty egalitarian. That's ecumenical, that religious term, isn't it? So pretty egalitarian, like everybody's equal and they should be treated well. And the better everybody's treated, the better the business will be. And I think that's a lovely thought. I think you see a little bit of that, say, in our favorite company in Texas, HEB, a little bit of that. Although some of you might work for HEB, it's like, nah, it's not really like that. But Knights of Labor also did not favor the use of strikes. You know what strikes are. Strikes are when, not like the teachers in Chicago, who are saying like, we're not coming back till we all get a shot, or, whatever their list of demands is. The shotting, I kind of get it. I do. But during this time period, sometimes people would attempt work strikes to get their employer's attention and, maybe get some of the demands they wanted, because, if the company's not producing, then they've got a problem. And that does get the attention of the people who own the company because they're not making money and they're not doing what the company's designed to do. So typically, companies can't handle a work stoppage for very long. Sometimes they hire replacement workers if there's an abundance of laborers, and sometimes they can't hire replacement workers. And your ability to strike really depends on the level of skill that you have and the number of people who can replace you. So I've got to stop looking at the cardinal, right? So like I could go on strike as a history professor and it wouldn't work very well because oddly enough, there are probably a lot of people in the Austin area with a master's or PhD in history, because honestly, what are you going to do with a master's or PhD in history if you're not teaching and there aren't that many teaching jobs? So I probably won't go on strike because I could be easily replaced. And they could also replace me with somebody who doesn't have as many years experience, so they could pay them less. So there you go. But if I taught nuclear physics, or if I were a professional basketball player, my strike might be not a professional basketball player. My strike might be more effective because my skill is more unique. I'm not saying it's necessarily more valuable, because who needs nuclear physics? We all need people that can dunk, right? But I mean, if the job is in demand and people will pay for it, then your strike is going to be more effective. All right. But during this time period, almost all the jobs were low skill, and we had 30 million new immigrants. Everybody wanted a job. So going on strike probably wasn't going to work super well. But Knights of Labor didn't favor it anyway, because they didn't really want to hurt the company. Now, the Knights of Labor will come to use the strike because their lovely thought about how we should all work together, and if you treat me well, it's good for the company, which, there's some logic to. Yeah, that didn't work. Because, the guy who owns the company is like, yeah, I'm fine. He's not really worried about his assembly line workers having a good life. I'm sure in the grander sense of stuff he is, but in the profit and margin statement and profit and loss statement, he's not very concerned, apparently. Because even guys like Carnegie, people went on strike against Carnegie, the most generous man who ever lived. In some ways, he gives away more money than I think anybody had ever given away. And he still, the people who worked for him thought they were treated like crap, and went on strike occasionally as well. The Homestead strike, that was against Carnegie. All right, so Knights of Labor, they have this really nice philosophy, which doesn't work super well, but they do end up going on strike occasionally. Other things that are unique about the Knights of Labor, like, is she still talking? Yes, I'm still talking about the Knights of Labor. They let everyone join. That's very unique about the Knights of Labor. Skilled workers, unskilled workers, they didn't care if you were male or female, although you're probably male because there weren't that many female assembly workers. But I mean, there were women who worked in meatpacking plants, and we already talked about the women who worked for that tailor, Hart, Schaffner, and Marx. There were women in the labor force, textile mills primarily. So male or female, skilled or unskilled, black or white, or whatever race or ethnicity. Of course, they didn't limit it to two. So whoever could join. So they were the most egalitarian, I keep saying that word, equal-minded labor union of the era. Probably, about the most egalitarian organization at all of this time period. They're starting to have some success. They're organizing, I guess their biggest success probably has to do with the railroad strike, 1877. They're able to get railway workers to help stop switching train tracks, and until the railroad workers are treated better. And if that shuts down commerce in the entire country, excuse me. There's going to be a lot of pressure on railroad companies to treat their workers better, because if the railroads aren't working, then nobody can do business. So that turns out to be fairly successful for a while. But then the railroad company owners appeal to the federal government and say, like, hey, can you help us out? And they send in the National Guard to break up the strike. And if you look at the history of labor strikes during this time period, it's very, very common for the business owners to go to the federal government and ask for an injunction against the strike, and to have troops sent in to break up the strike. So troops coming in to break up stuff, we don't see it very often. I know what you're thinking. We saw it at the inauguration. You did. You did. And I know there wasn't anything to break up at the inauguration, but a week before it was a little iffy, wasn't it? So that idea of having troops to come in to protect things, to break things up, that's been most often used in our history to protect big business. That probably cheers you up a lot, doesn't it? It's like, yeah. And you saw it used a little bit during Reconstruction to protect Black voters in the South, but that doesn't last forever. And that only happens because it benefits the party in power, the Republicans. Not saying the Republicans didn't have good thoughts about letting African Americans vote, but there's always something else going on too. All right, so back to the Knights of Labor. So the Knights of Labor, some success, the union's growing, they have over 1 million members, and then they plan like a labor union festival or something, where they're going to get a whole bunch of speakers together to talk about workers' rights, that kind of thing. And they're going to hold it in Chicago. That's where all the stuff goes down. That's where the press conference today was for the teacher union group that won't go back to work. So Chicago, it's the home of labor activity, or a home of labor activity. And Chicago is really an important gateway city from the, the east to the west. There's a Great Lake, and it's Michigan, right? It's Michigan. Why do I not know which Great Lake? Dang it. And there's a river, and all the railroads converge there. So it's a really important city for commerce. Really important city for commerce. Great Lake, major river, and railroads. Yeah. So it's a big deal. They call it what? The city of broad shoulders? I don't know. Do you read poetry? Some poets from the time period called it a bunch of stuff. But anyway, so Haymarket Square is in Chicago, and there's going to be this big labor talking festival, meeting, convention sort of thing out. And some anarchists find out that it's going to happen. And if you watch the news, this should probably make more sense to you now than it would have maybe a year or two ago. Because sometimes, like Knights of Labor, they're having this big event, and then some other people go like, they're having a big event, let's go crash it. So some anarchists decide they're going to come to the big event and blow stuff up, because that's what anarchists do. There you go. And that could be a little bit like the people on the West, Antifa, or Antifa. I don't know how you would say their name, but some of the folks in that group, they're not just anti-fascist, or some of the folks who come when that group comes are not just like, hey, we hate fascism, although I don't know, you consider the US government fascist. But some of them is like, no, we just want to blow stuff up. We're anarchists. So anarchists like to blow stuff up, and they don't like the government at all. So those guys were going to show up at the Haymarket Affair. So the Knights of Labor said like, hey, we got to call this off. But here's the problem: in 1886, nobody's got a cell phone. So it's really hard to call stuff off. So they tried to call stuff off, but people still came. And then the anarchists blew some stuff up and killed some policemen. Okay. In the day, back in that day, they really did like to blow stuff up. They were bigger on blowing stuff up. I think arson, although they bring the Molotov cocktail, which I know isn't exactly blowing stuff up, but it has an explosion, but it does the arson thing too. But they set off bombs at Haymarket Square, and then the leaders of the city and the police and the newspaper owners worked together to make sure that the Knights of Labor got blamed for the destruction. Now, self-made bombs, yep, that is true. Yep, and it does lead to police shooting into the crowd. And you'll see that again at, oh goodness, the Vietnam protests at Jackson State and the one in Ohio, Kent State, Vietnam era. So yeah, that stunning the police usually has some bad effects, doesn't it? You hope in the modern era, maybe they'll just do those flash bang grenades, or maybe some tear gas or whatever. I clearly haven't been to a riot. So my niece was in one of the ones downtown this summer, not on purpose. She's fairly oblivious to political stuff and the news, but for whatever reason, she decided she wanted to go to 6th Street, and she went on one of those nights where they had a demonstration and stuff got set on fire and someone got killed. And I called her and I said, you got to watch the news. You can't just go downtown right now. You have to watch the news. Oh my goodness. I know we think stuff doesn't matter, but it does. Just want to hear some live music or something. I don't know. All right. But there's a lot of stuff written. Yeah, traffic's always bad downtown. There's a lot of stuff written about, or more recent stuff written about Haymarket Square, because most history books, and I think I know ours is the same way, says that the Knights of Labor really weren't involved. There were apparently a few people who were members of the Knights of Labor who were also anarchists. So kind of that cross between the two groups. So certainly the leadership of the Knights of Labor, and this wasn't a planned activity, but maybe some of the people involved were involved in both groups, but certainly it was not the goal of the Knights of Labor to set off bombs. But they're going to get blamed for it. And if you're wondering, like, why would the police and the business and the newspapers conspire together? Because, it's a different era for the police. And I think, was it this class? No, it was somebody in 1301 where people, no, maybe it was this class, because you're talking about how Reconstruction didn't work. Yes, of course it was this class. And then prison industrial complex and police being too hard on former slaves. And then that continues on to this day, although they didn't say that inartfully. I understand there aren't former slaves to this day, hopefully. I know that there's other sorts of slavery in the modern era, but in the old days, those days before the progressive era, sometimes the police only protected you if you paid them. So businessmen, police, and businessmen often owned the newspapers as well, because the newspapers were the main means of communication and news and that sort of stuff. So owning those helped you control how you were reported about. So the police and newspapers and big business conspiring together wouldn't have seemed like a super unusual thing back then. I don't know if it would seem like it is, unusual to you now, but back then certainly would not have. So Knights of Labor, very long story, apologies, long story short. The Knights of Labor fell apart. People, they were seen as bad, I guess the way that GameStop is going to fall apart. Sorry, GameStop. No, it's way worse than that. They'll be seen like, I don't know, some organization that people used to think was good, but then figured out was bad. Yeah, not GameStop. Sorry. Yeah, no one thinks GameStop was bad. I don't know what a good example of that would be, but so people are embarrassed by the Knights of Labor. They don't want to be a member of it anymore. It's associated with violence, so they quit. So the Knights of Labor really begins to fall apart because of being blamed for the Haymarket affair or Haymarket Square incident, or whatever you want to call it. Your book calls it Haymarket affair. All right, there we go. Let's talk about the Homestead Strike. And we can talk about other stuff that's in there as well. What are you thinking? Why do you not have your book? All right, Homestead Strike. Crowd, I think they make videos about the Homestead Strike. I think the Homestead Strike might have been one of those 10 events that unexpectedly changed American history in that A&E or History Channel? History Channel, I think, documentary. But Homestead Strike, Homestead, Pennsylvania. This is a Carnegie steel mill. It's one of the most productive steel mills. Now, 1892, I know you're looking at that and you go like, I know what's going on in 1892. No, you don't. I know you don't. There's a big recession. So the economy is, it's kind of on a downward slide during this time period. So the steel mill dudes are saying, you know what, we just can't pay you as much as we used to. So they're cutting wages, especially for unskilled laborers. So the skilled laborers decide they're going to go on strike, and the unskilled laborers decide that they're going to support them and go on strike as well at the Carnegie Steel Mill at Homestead. So the Homestead Steel Mill. And the Homestead Steel Mill, they didn't have enough employees, of course, because everybody went on strike. And then they started to hire some replacement workers. Replacement workers, can we say that? Do you know what the nickname for replacement workers is? I don't know. Do we know this in a non-union state? They're called replacement workers. No, they're called scabs. Scabs. Did you say that in the chat? Let's see. I can't open the chat. Substitutes, I like that. That's what we called them at school. We would never call, that would be terrible if we called our substitutes scabs, wouldn't it? We never did that. But they called them scabs because they're stopping the bleeding of not working, that sort of thing. So, yeah. And honestly, I promise you, as a former high school teacher, we love substitute teachers. Like, there's no taking a day off without the substitute teacher. We would have never called them bad names at all. No, we love them. Yeah. And there's not enough of them now. So they would call these substitute workers scabs because they weren't as appreciative of them as you might imagine. Because the thought is, if they can hire enough of those folks, they'll just fire everybody who went on strike. And that's a huge danger if you're an unskilled worker to go on strike. So they went on strike, and they also kind of surrounded the plant and tried to keep the replacement workers or the scabs out. They tried to keep them from coming in. And so then Carnegie hired somebody called the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And you may be vaguely familiar with them. And there are books about them if you're ever interested, but they're kind of like the hired version of the Secret Service for a while. They do work as the Secret Service for quite a while and protect the president and other folks, but you can also hire them to protect your company. So like a little hired army. So Carnegie hired a little army to protect his steel mill. And yeah, so they shot at the people who, yep, like a militia Secret Service kind of, but for hire. Yeah. Yeah, this is highly illegal in the modern era, highly illegal. So they hired the Pinkertons and they came and protected the plant. And yeah, mercenaries for sure. Yeah. Oh, they're part of a game. Okay. No, that's good. I mean, sometimes the historical references come in handy. I'm here for you people. I was trying to have a soccer group meeting last night and somebody kept playing a video game, and everyone on screen recognized what game they were playing except me. It's like, I'm so out of the loop. But at any rate, the Pinkertons, they're all going like, hey, maybe we can play later. Like, shut up. We're having a soccer meeting. Yeah. But they all planned a game of whatever. There was something about animals. I don't know what it was. But anyway. All right. The Pinkertons were not playing games. So they stopped the strike, and that's it. Animal Crossing. That's the one. So the strike was stopped, and the way that the strike stopped was, it seemed like the strikers were kind of winning, and there was kind of a lockout in the camp, and there were, or not the camp, the plant. There were even a couple of times where the Pinkertons got the crap beaten out of them by the workers and their wives. There was one incident where the wives beat up the Pinkertons. But then one of the strikers went a little nutty, guy named Alexander Berkman, and he just couldn't take it anymore. So he went down to the headquarters of the Carnegie Steel Mill, the Homestead offices, and he stabbed the plant manager, a guy named Henry Clay Frick. I know Frick sounds like he's a bad guy. So he goes and he stabs Henry Clay Frick, and then he shoots him. And then he tries to blow up the building. They catch him before he's blown up the building. I'm telling you, anarchists in this country are kind of rough. So they capture him before he blows up the building, and then that Henry Clay Frick, who is, did escalate quickly, who's kind of a, unpleasant fellow, he says, you know what, I'll be fine. And he finishes work and then goes to the hospital. So he stays till 5 o'clock because he's got other people to fire or mercenaries to hire or something, because he is a little rough. And it's like, man, you cannot kill that dude. Yeah, he's just rough like that. So public opinion really goes against the strikers once that fellow goes a little nutty and stabs, shoots, and tries to blow up the building. So they lost public support, and then the town stopped supporting them, and the public officials stopped supporting them. So then they got all the replacement workers, or scabs, not substitutes, and hired them, and then they lowered the wages, and everybody was really happy. Even Carnegie, who had been overseas vacationing during a recession. But if it's a recession or a pandemic and you have money, you can go vacation. I say that and I went on a trip, maybe over break, but not when I was the mayor of Austin and told everybody to shut down and I went to Cancun. I did not do that. But that was Andrew Carnegie during that time period. They didn't have a pandemic. They were just broke, except for Andrew Carnegie, who wasn't. Famous people who worked for Carnegie, that Frick guy was famous in the time period. And I think we mentioned one of his accountants was Charles Schwab. So that name is familiar. All right, that did escalate quickly. There were not a whole lot of labor unions or labor movements that people thought of as favorable. Usually the people who owned the companies were seen as more favorable during this time period. And, you know, very few times in our history, maybe in the modern era a little, I don't know, you guys may have a different opinion, but very few times in our history does anybody who breaks the law, do we look at them and go like, no, that was justified. Certainly not in this era. I mean, it's just not the way that our society viewed stuff. You'll see that a little more for stupid reasons during Prohibition. Because people don't mind if you break the law and get alcohol. Yeah, that doesn't seem to bother people. And then you might start to see people admiring you if you break the law during the civil rights movement, but even that's not universal. And in the modern era, I don't know. We've seen something that looks like lawlessness quite a bit in the last year or so, but it's kind of mixed up in protest and vandalism and righteous cause and yeah. But I don't know that it's any more messy now than it was in the era we were talking about, because I don't know. Maybe you see parallels. Maybe you don't. I don't know. Do you see parallels? All right, I'm going to stop for a second. We'll keep going here in a minute. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you, especially, you know, I taught high school for about 30 years. And although for me, the most difficult things happened the first 3 years because I taught at some really exciting schools. The attitude of students and honestly their parents, it wouldn't matter, you know, kids are kids and they'll do what they do. But if their parents don't get mad at them when they get caught, yeah, no, that's a different thing. And I can remember listening to a parent talking to their kid who had gotten caught cheating in a math class. And believe me, math not my thing, but still, you know, I would earn my honest B. But I can remember that guy telling this kid, you know what, I wouldn't have graduated from college if I hadn't cheated through my math class. It's like, sir, you're not helping. So yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. And I don't know how different society was. Yeah, no kidding. I don't know how different society was during that time period. It was different, no doubt. But, you know, at the upper ends of society, certainly people who own businesses did things that clearly are a little shifty. Can I say shifty? Um, that people in the lower ends of their business would not have been able to get away with. So, yeah. So I think human nature is it's bad if you get caught. But, you know, we had so long in our history where it was just a big church going society as well. And whether, I don't know, whether you believed it or not, society did. So, yeah, I don't know. All right, I'm stopping for a second. Do you guys have any questions or comments? Any concerns? All right, then I'm taking a drink of water. Good activity in the backyard today. We got squirrels and cardinals. If I would turn the computer around, they would go. All right, let's go back to the notes then. Yeah, yeah. Are we good on the weekly question though? Do we want to think about that? Any of the Native American stuff? I mean, to me, I think the weekly question's fairly straightforward. You got to talk about the Dawes Act. Remember them splitting up the reservation. The goal is to, of course, after eliminating the buffalo, changing how Native Americans make a living, selling off the best farmland, and closing the reservation so it's much harder for people to get off the reservation without being detected. And taking the kids away, putting them in the boarding schools. So the goal, the intended goal of the US government is to change Native American culture. And they would think of it as improving Native American culture. And in that era, the inferior culture is the one that gets taken over. And you know they're inferior because they got taken over. So if they're so weak that we can easily take them over, they clearly need to be improved. They got to become more like us, whoever we are. And we are in the Midwest, at least small family farmers. So they're going to work on turning Native Americans into small family farmers. And you can talk about Native American experiences. You talk about the Dawes Act. You're supposed to talk about what else are you supposed to talk about? Oh, the Ghost Dance and Wounded Knee. So Ghost Dance is hoping to reclaim Native American culture, cultural movement, not, a traditional revolution, although it is possible and likely that the US government saw it as revolutionary, even though it wasn't intended and it wasn't violent. Became violent at Wounded Knee, but because dancers got killed, not so much because dancers did something. But the goal was to remake tribal culture, or to return to tribal culture, and that, of course, was not something that the US government wanted. And again, your textbook, look at those subject headings, should be very helpful, I hope. I hope it's helpful. Not trying to make it a mystery. So, all right. I don't know. Native American society gets destroyed more because of disease, initially. And I do wonder sometimes, if we lived together peacefully and immunity was built up, how that would be different. You can look to what happened in Canada with they don't call them Native Americans, First Peoples. And what typically is developed there is two very separate societies. Yeah. And they're isolated geographically. Yeah. It's not that there's a rule or anything in the modern era, but usually the First Peoples live in Inuit. That's certainly some of the groups. There's a bunch, but they typically live in the northern part of Canada where, there just aren't cities, and they live off the land, and they do. They probably, I think they have mines and probably oil and stuff like that as well. Because part of that land is where they find that stuff. And I know I've mentioned 82 times where I'm from, but where I'm from, southwest corner of Missouri, so close to Oklahoma that we studied, Canada might be the final frontier, Alaska as well. We studied Native cultures so much, and what you figure out is that the ones who really kind of survive and get to control what their culture is like are the ones with money. And the ones who ended up with money in Oklahoma, the ones who bought the subsoil rights to the reservation. So when they found oil and other minerals there, natural gas, whatever they found. I know that natural gas is not a mineral, by the way. But they mine a bunch of stuff where I'm from. It's why we all have weird diseases and stuff, lead and galena and heavy metals and things like that. So people from where I'm from, yeah, we're not okay. But if the tribe bought the subsoil rights and they found all that stuff, then the tribe ended up getting a bunch of money, and then they created tribal schools and that sort of stuff. And they had a better chance to be healthy, control their destiny, their political destiny. I don't mean eternal destiny or anything like that. And they also had they could restore their culture through those tribal schools. And also some of those guys, their powwow, if you win the dance or song competitions, you get more money. No. And then, of course, in the modern era, everybody knows you can have a casino. But casinos typically don't bring a lot of wealth to the community. They tend to bring a lot of wealth to whoever runs the casino. It's my impression just from stuff that I've read. I don't own a casino, by the way. All right. But I don't know how things would have been different. The populations, Native Americans, they're decimated because of disease, but you know, they're larger, of course, in places like Canada, or, you know, there's places, not so much in the United States. There are a few places in the United States, but more in Mexico and some South American countries where natives live completely separate lives culturally, and they're isolated. So, and that's probably how it would have continued in the United States, with the exception of like Cherokee and Iroquois, who developed more European structures of government intentionally. Their leaders looked at it and said, like, this is going to have the best outcome for us. So those tribes would have been different and are different, to be honest. Yeah. All right. That's my thought. I don't know if you guys have thoughts you want to share about that. I don't know. And I was reading, this is my other class, the 1301 class. They were asked a question about how natives and Europeans viewed land use differently. And I guess we have just sort of led you guys to think that Native Americans are like perfect, idyllic people that never harmed anyone and hugged Bambi and never misused the land and stuff like that. So the original conservationists, and that Europeans just come over and slash and burn and stuff. You know, in that era and in a farming era, they're not going to want to intentionally destroy the land, whether they're European or Native. It's just they see land use differently. Very few Native American groups did agriculture. You know, they did more hunting and gathering. And Europeans did agriculture because they ate more of those grain crops and stuff and made bread and did that sort of thing. So farmers didn't want to destroy the land. They just are going to clear more of it and use it differently. Now, in the modern era, 20th century, you do see pollution and stuff like that. So we'll work on that. And the miners, we talked about that a little bit, but they fixed that pretty quickly. Yeah, definitely clear cut down all the trees. I know another thing that my high school students always thought is that we had gotten rid of all the forests in the United States and cut down every tree. But look at my backyard with the squirrels and the cardinals right now to see that we have not cut down every tree. But I think it's something like 2/3 of what is the United States is still covered in grassland or forest. It's the places you don't live, like my home state. Yeah. Missouri, it's mostly trees. And Oklahoma and Nebraska and stuff, plains, they don't really have trees. West, dang, you're not kidding. I went out there this weekend. Dang mesquite trees. All right. Let's talk about other stuff. I didn't mean to waste your time. Yeah, and if you've driven across the United States, like I occasionally will take what my husband and I used to call the pilgrimage, where we would drive to Missouri and then Ohio to visit relatives, and dang, there'll be like 2 or 3 states that are either all trees or all cornfields. You go like, is there anything else here? No, there is not. Yeah, pine is kind of Louisiana has big pine forests as well. That's true. Yeah, there's some university, I know what university it is. It's Rice University, owns a bunch of forests, and it's why going to Rice used to be free up through the 1970s. They have so much money. But yeah, no, it's true in the hill country as well. And they could still let you go for free, but colleges don't do that anymore. I know. Can you imagine? I know we were born at the wrong time. It was a little early for me as well. But yeah, Rice used to be free. Can you imagine going to Rice for free? That would have been amazing. All right. I went to Angelo State for free. You guys could do that too. All right, let's talk a little bit about this, but not go too far into it because, you know, I want to save something for next week. But let's talk about angry farmers. Sorry, I'm scrolling down. Oh, excuse me, there's so much in the next. Oh, dang, there is a lot in the next chapter. So let's talk about angry farmers for a while. Why are farmers angry? I don't know. Have you ever lived on a farm? I'd be angry too. You know, I'm from the Midwest where there are farms. My college roommate's from Iowa where it is just a giant farm. And you're angry because you never see anybody. And yeah, there's not enough money. If you're a family farmer, dang, it's hard. It really is. And one crop failure can really ruin you. It's a problem. The reason farmers are angry during this time period, aside from farming, is just really hard. It is because you're completely dependent on the elements. You can do everything right. You can plant at the right time, fertilize, you can do all the stuff you're supposed to do. And one tornado wipes the stuff out, or a dang swarm of locusts come and they eat all your crop. And what are you going to do about it? No, it's a really iffy kind of job. And yeah. And sometimes people looked down on farmers, especially, as people start to go more to college and they're more into professions and they start to move to cities more. It's like, just country bumpkins running the farm. They don't have any intelligence. They're not very skilled. So it's just a hard life in general. But here's the reason they were really mad during this time period. Big business, flamethrower could be hard on the crops though, but that'll do it. And I don't know if you've ever been in the middle of one of those swarms, but one of the years that I lived in Missouri, we had something called a 10-year locust. And every 10 years, those things came and they were like the crickets here. You could not get rid of them. They were in your house, they were all over the place, and it was not cool. It felt like the Old Testament. Yeah, goodness, rough stuff. So the farmers were really mad, aside from the locust, the 10-year locust, and grasshoppers. They're so destructive, and they're so gross too. But anyway, okay, sorry. Farmers were angry during this time period because big business was shafting them. They're giving them I don't know, whatever people give you when they cheat you, but they were charged very high shipping rates. So if they needed to take their crops to market, rather than getting a lower business shipping rate, they got a much higher rate. And if they needed electricity or water service, that sort of stuff, the water and electricity companies, telephone, telegraph, charged them excessively high rates. They couldn't get the same rates that they could get in the cities. Now, I do understand, it's easier to get lower rates in the city because you're closer, that kind of stuff. Taxes and tariffs are a problem as well. They're not, but their problem is, and you're right about that, their problem is they feel like the government really caters to big business at the expense of farmers during this time period. And they're probably correct. So, and we know the farmers in the South are angry because their markets have disappeared. So, and they're not ready to shift away from cotton. So, it's tough for farmers. Transportation's too expensive, communication's too expensive, and farmers are becoming more and more efficient. So they're producing more crops, which means the crop prices are declining, but the equipment that they need to be efficient, the mechanized farm equipment, is very expensive. Still true. It's why your grandpa still has the 40-year-old tractor. Does your grandpa have a 40-year-old tractor? But those things are expensive. And the modern ones, they have Wi-Fi and air conditioning and stuff. Just trust me on this, but they cost as much as a house. They're really expensive. So in the old days, they honestly probably cost as much as a house back then. It's just houses were cheaper. So the equipment you needed was expensive. Your utilities were expensive. The communication, transportation was expensive, but the amount of money you were making per bushel is going down. So they're very frustrated. You could live in it. Yeah. It's a farm. You just got a bathroom outside. No one knows or cares. All right. So they decided to get more political pull. They would need to form co-ops or farmers alliances. So they start these groups in part so they can sell their crops together and agree on a certain, like create their own minimum wage, essentially, agree to sell their corn for no less than $10 a bushel or whatever price they picked. But the co-ops didn't hold together very well for that. Because, I mean, if you're desperate and somebody says, you know what, I'll give you 9, you go like, dang, I got 12 kids to feed, I'll take the 9. So the co-ops didn't work as well for the selling. They worked probably a little better for buying stuff in bulk, but they also discussed politics and wanted to start political organizations to help other farmers. So they're going to turn into a political party. They're going to run a political party, and the party will be referred to as the Populist or the People's Party. Now, They're not so naive to think that there are enough farmers in the United States that they can win an election necessarily, like a national election. Although they will run candidates for president who will affect the outcomes of elections. And in, you know too, because you've watched politics enough, in the United States, if you're not the Democrats or Republicans, you're not going to win. However, the not Democrats and not Republicans can sometimes pull voters away from Democrats and Republicans, and then Democrats and Republicans go, gosh, we should listen to them and adopt some of their ideas. So that's, the best you can do as a third party in a national election. Thus far in the history of the United States, after the last 4 years, I hesitate to say, things can't change because we've had some strange times. But the populists did win a lot of farm and ranch states. Like they won the governorship and both houses of the legislature in places like Texas, or they did well in Kansas or Ohio or other places, Iowa, some of the states that start with vowels where they raise corn and wheat. So they did do well in some state and local elections. Now, we have had socialists run for president, but yeah, not in your lifetime. And there's a socialist party that always, runs somebody. It's just no one ever votes for them. But you're about to see socialists as we turn into the 20th century. And then you'll see them again during the Great Depression. Some weird stuff has to happen for us to go like, hey, let's try socialism. So, and some of it is how workers are treated during this time period. Some of it is that. And then the Great Depression is the other reasons, like capitalism is a little iffy right now. Of course, everything was a little iffy then, but there were a lot of weird things going on. But the farmers, it's like, just be fair to us, give us a shot. And certainly farm issues are more important in farming states. Oh boy, are we going to talk about socialism and communism today? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I had a student from, where was he from? Why can't I think of it? Dang, he would be so upset with me right now. It's right next to Albania. So I have friends from Albania, but I can't remember. Is it Yugoslavia where Joseph Broz Tito was? But what? It wasn't Yugoslavia. I have to look now. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But when I taught U.S. history at high school, we always sort of joked about how terrible and some of you are like, it's not a joke. Communism, I'm not. Okay. But when we get past World War II, communism is a fairly important issue in U.S. history for a variety of reasons. We're talking Cold War, Red Scare, that sort of stuff. So we never talked about communism. We called it evil, godless communism. That's just what we did, to really make a point so they would remember that sort of stuff. And this kid, who I'm trying to think of where he was from, and it's driving me crazy. This young man was from a country that was socialist, communist, and it had gone fairly well, but it's a really tiny country whose name I can't even remember. I'll feel bad about that. I'll remember for next time because it's probably not super important. And then he had me the first day, he's like yelling at me and telling me he didn't like me and that kind of stuff. It's like, why are you so upset with me? And he said, because you always say communism is evil and godless. And I go like, we're mostly doing this so that you'll remember stuff about the Cold War, not because, I don't like your home country, whose name I can't even remember at this moment. It's going to drive me crazy. But yeah, communism, I don't know. I think it's a lovely theory.
Was it Yemen?
No, it definitely was not. It's definitely Eastern European. And I know that it's near Albania because I told him I had friends from Albania. And then he goes, I hate those people. I'm sorry. I'm going to tell you what he said. But he said, I hate those people. They're all Muslim. It's like, dang, let's start with that. And then, yeah, my friends are Catholic because they have some of those too in Albania. I don't know why I can't remember, but it's not important. Sorry. I blame the cardinal for distracting me. Okay, so farmers, I know you're going like, could you just get back to the farmers? I apologize. I'll be better next time. So the farmers, very unhappy, and they develop a political party, and their slogan is very cool: raise less corn and more hell. Less corn because then the prices will rise. So, and then more hell because you're politicians. It's what you do. You got to make noise. You got to get people to notice. They're not naive enough to think that they can only win with farmers' causes, though. So they add some stuff that they think will get wage workers to help them, like minimum wage, government ownership of telephone and telegraph. And if you're wondering why will that help, so everyone can get it affordably. So they're going to try to expand their message. Yes, they definitely understood about supply and demand, even though you'll see what they do doesn't really follow supply and demand all the time. They also wanted silver coinage. We were with the gold standard during that time period, which really benefits wealthier people, means there's a smaller money supply. They wanted to create inflation. You're going like, why? Because they thought it would, and they're right, it would cause the crop prices to rise, probably cause their expenses to rise as well. But they wanted to coin silver, and that would be a way to create inflation. They favored bimetallism, have a gold and silver standard. And they wanted the ratio of silver to be 16 to 1. So every $1 in gold that was coined, they wanted $16 in silver. And they thought that this inflation would help them. And, there's always somebody that's sneaky somewhere. And the people who really also favored that were the people who own silver mines. So, because, they just discovered a lot of silver in the Black Hills, and there was some in Alaska, but quite a bit in Colorado, and I think maybe some in Montana as well. But so these mining companies go like, nah, that's cool with us, coin some silver, or at least buy the silver. And what you'll notice if you study this part of this era in more detail than we're going to, which probably means you're not going to unless you study US history, what you notice is the government will buy large amounts of silver during this time period, but not coin it and release it into circulation. So it really only helps the people that own the silver mines, because dang, rich people and government, they're just like that. They're always together. I'm so cynical. The more I study US history, copper and bronze standard, man, that's the standard I'm living on right now, I think, copper and bronze standard. All right. If you're wondering, like, the populist racist, yeah, little. They do have farmers alliances. They have Black farmers alliances, but they meet separately. So they're segregated. They allow African American members, but they meet in segregated units. So we'll talk a whole bunch more about these folks in the next class as well. But they do eventually get a major candidate to back their ideas, a fellow named William Jennings Bryan, who runs in 1896 and gives a very famous speech called the Cross of Gold speech, where he compares farmers to Jesus, and they like that. And if you read, I was going to say old political speeches, but they really don't have to be that old. If you remember, I know you're going like, we're not that old, but if you remember George Bush, the one from Texas who was our governor for a while, when he gave political speeches, he quoted scripture and hymns, like church songs, all the time. And if you look at a lot of these speeches, there's all these analogies to Jesus, and there's Bible verses quoted. And that's true really all throughout our history, even up into the modern era, although we don't see it quite as much. We do see it some. So comparing whoever it is you like to Jesus, typically very good political strategy. Now, if you look at the whole speech, which there's not a copy of in your book, but there's excerpts, he compares the bankers and the businessmen who cheat people to Jews and Muslims. And if you're wondering, is there any political backlash for that in 1896? No, there's absolute no. I mean, he loses the election, but it doesn't have anything to do with that. Yeah, those are safe groups to harass during that time period. And that's also, when I told you could read How the Other Half Lives, and part of the interesting thing about reading How the Other Half Lives, if you did that for your book review, would be it shows you the acceptable prejudices of the time. I guess I decided I was going to stop sharing the notes, didn't I? Was this the class too? Let me see. Where you thought there was something wrong with the book review assignment. Maybe that was the afternoon 1301. I'll check that. Somebody said that the book list didn't go with the time period. I think yours does. So I'll double check the 1301. Okay. I feel like now is a good time to stop because I'm kind of out of material. I don't want to go too far ahead. And I feel like I've talked about enough stuff that isn't super relevant to you at the moment.